Everyone.
Hello, everybody. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm seeing some people flowing in, getting settled. So I wanted to welcome you. My name is Rey Banks, otherwise known as Rey, and I use they, them pronouns. I am a therapist with the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. I have my LPC and CADC, alcohol and drug and licensure. I work primarily with youth and adults, and more recently I've been helping out with queer identity transitions and queer and questioning youth who are trying to come out to their families and the community and assisting in that transition. It's been a really beautiful process, and I'm really excited today. What we're talking about is exactly in line with the work that I do specifically and everyone else that is going to be speaking today. Some of what we're going to be talking about is honoring the trauma of the two-spirit LGBTQIA+ community, our identities, the stories of how we came to be, and how the power of our identities are helping to heal our communities and ourselves through psychedelic communities and the work that we're all doing. I'm joined today with my co-moderator, Maya. Maya Seale, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Maya. I'm currently located on Caddo, Wichita, and Comanche land, colonially known as Dallas, Texas. I am a research intern at the SNAP Lab, where I'm exploring how various dimensions of the gender diverse and expansive mosaic might affect the outcome of MDMA-assisted group therapy for minority stress. I am also a research assistant here in Dallas at the WIG Neuroimaging Lab, looking at cognitive network neuroscience as a window into dementia. I am also a peer volunteer with Fireside Project, providing support to the transgender community during psychedelic experiences. And I've been involved with Students for Sensible Drug Policy, having passed a medical amnesty policy through my student government, and also participated in direct action advocating for the end of mass incarceration. And I'm going to go ahead and pass this back to Rey. Rey, I think you might be muted.
I am muted. Thank you. So I'm Mexica. I come from Eagle Clan, Michoacan, Mexico. I'm also a danzante, and part of acknowledging the land that we're on is sharing prayer. So I wanted to share just a quick prayer to center our space and thank our presenters and thank the people who are working behind the scenes on this, and thank all of you who are participating. And this poem was created by Miguel Kimichipili Bravo, and it goes, Tlazokamati we Yokoyani, Grand Creator, thank you, ancestors, relatives near and far. Each and every one of us deserved into being for such a very special reason and purpose. We are all very special people, spirits, one and together. May we always know this. We humbly ask that you always keep us in alignment with our personal power and unique medicine. Every piece of us that has been stolen, lost, or unrealized, our love, thoughts, dignity, courage, creativity, abundance, and all things of our essence. Thank you to all the ancestor spirits with me and us on this earth walk, guiding us in ways that we sometimes may not see or understand. We acknowledge you, ancestors, for your sacrifice to preserve these beautiful ways and traditions. Tlazokamati means thank you in Nahuatl. Thank you so much for taking the time. There's also a land acknowledgement where we're all located, except for Marx, but we'll get into that. Pacific Northwest, we acknowledge the unceded ancestral lands of Chinook, Cayuse, Umatilla, Cowlitz, Multnomah, Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, and Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. Tonight, this is a first part of a 3-part series, Conscious Community Series, celebrating Pride Month. Throughout the month of June, we'll have educators speak on many different topics. We have ethics and community and healing with veteran communities. Amazing content. Please do not miss on that. And I'm going to give it back to Maya to introduce the presenters.
So today we are going to be viewing some amazing presentations. First, we'll see Marx Cassity, who has worked in the healing arts for over 20 years with renowned therapists, spiritual teachers, academics, and medicine people from around the world. As a two-spirit, queer, mixed-race Native American who grew up on the Osage Reservation of Oklahoma as an enrolled member of their tribe. They sit on the Advisory Council on the Diversity for Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies and have been trained in MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. A graduate of the North American Nonviolent Communication Leadership Program, Marx also formally studied meditation and Advaita Vedanta, which led to a period of residential study at Arsha Vidya Pitham in Rishikesh, India. Before becoming a psychotherapist, they worked as a registered nurse for 26 years with specializations in ICU, emergency room, and home health nursing. Marx was a first responder at the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, deepening their understanding of trauma and the treatment of PTSD for first responders. Their medical knowledge also informs their approach to various components of holistic well-being. Following that, we will watch a presentation from Dr. Katherine A. Costello, who is a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging leader with over 12 years of experience in creating cultures of belonging, developing DEIB trainings, and researching and writing about gender and sexuality. She sits at the intersection of several marginalized and privileged identities. She strives to continually educate herself and leverage her privilege to create more equitable systems and cultures. She holds a BA in Women's and Gender Studies from Smith College and a PhD in Feminist and Queer Theory from Duke University. She has also pursued advanced training at the ICF-accredited Mindfulness Coaching School and is a practicing Buddhist. When she is not researching or leading organizational change, she coaches 2SLGBTQIA+ individuals in undertaking mental and somatic shifts and cultivating skills necessary to be in thriving relationship with themselves, others, and the world. This includes psychedelic integration coaching, evidence-based therapeutic tools, nonviolent communication, and mindfulness practice, as well as intersectional feminist, queer, and experience. So without further ado, let's see our presenters.
Thank you, Maya. We had some sound issues there, but I think they're gone. Seems like we're okay. Yeah, so Zach, if you'll pull up that first slide. Thank you, Marie and Maya. I can't, there we go. Okay, great. I was like, I can see everybody, but not the slides. Okay, great. All right. Hi, yeah, I'm Marx Cassity, also known as Marx. They, them, theirs. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, as Maya said in the intro there, as well as an artist, a singer-songwriter, which we'll get into a little bit more of that later. It's another one of my things I do. Marx is a non-binary version of my name that I've been embodying more lately. I am Osage from the Osage Nation of Oklahoma, where I grew up and where I'm currently residing here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. My Osage name is Huedewan, which means looking to the eagle. And I don't know, Kate, do you want to chime in right now and say hi, or are we holding off?
I think you got this, and just keep rolling with it. And I'll...
Kate will do this in a little bit. I storytell. I'm a storyteller and musician and artist and expresser. And Kate's an academic and really wraps things really nicely into like some fabulous academic language that I love. And so today, Kate and I will have this topic, Beyond Oneness, Honoring the Trauma and Power of 2SLGBTQ plus identities. And we want to start with a disclaimer. This slide, you will notice, does not say anti-oneness. It says beyond oneness. We've given this talk a few times, mostly to clinicians, and sometimes folks get really bummed out that we are somehow against oneness consciousness. And we're like, no, we are not anti-oneness consciousness. I spent many years in depth study of Eastern thought, Advaita Vedanta, as part of my healing. Kate is a practicing Buddhist. We get it. We love mystical oneness experiences. We've benefited from that. However, there is more to the picture. We're also queer people, Kate cisgendered and myself transmasculine, non-binary, mixed race, indigenous person. And in our work, we focus a lot in supporting the safe and authentic expression of marginalized people who live within oppression and whose authentic identities are often threatened or discriminated against. Identity that goes underground, right, in order to survive, and the trauma of that. So in our work and in my training in psychedelic assisted trauma therapy, we have made note of some of the ways that research studies measure the success of psychedelic assisted therapy based on the research participants' experiences of oneness. So there's an actual measure for that called the MEQ scale that Kate will go and talk about later. So, we're saying, when mystical experiences of being joined or empathetic, loving, merged, in awe of oneness, we all, with all, great, yay, very healing, wonderful, great for the world. However, we think there's more to the story when it comes to healing trauma, when it's in the context of identity, especially marginalized identity. So I myself have a personal story of healing that is an example of what we're talking about. So I'm going to share some of that with you today, some of my journey around healing and around identity. And so I'll start by saying, though, I never dreamed I would be giving talks about personal psychedelic therapeutic experiences. That's something I never talked about in grad school, getting an MA in counseling or with clients or in my internships. That was a very separate world from my clinical work. But here we are at this place in history where MAPS and Rick Doblin, all the great, researchers who stayed the course, and now here we are with the DEA and the FDA in this place that we are in this, evolution around psychedelics, therapeutic psychedelic, legal, research-based, and as where we're headed. So, it's vulnerable, but, it's powerful. So, and I believe in the work, so I'll share. Next slide, which is healing homophobic and transphobic trauma through mystical experiences, including plant spirit medicine ceremonies. The psychedelic experiences I've had, and just as importantly, the medicine carriers, healers, spiritual leaders, therapists in those settings, setting, have helped me with a lot of healing. For sure, healing homophobic and transphobic experiences and the fallout from those experiences that were my personal trauma, in combination with EMDR therapy and an intensive spiritual practice and a geographical shift out of where I grew up in very conservative environment in the era of the AIDS crisis, and out of that more religiously conservative experience into the consciousness communities of Boulder, Colorado initially, Naropa and all that, all the hippie kids, it was awesome. And for me to land in, and eventually the West Coast, California, the Bay Area, I was there for 15 years and up into Portland and all that. And where a lot of healing took place for me, to the point where I am back home now in Oklahoma, in Tulsa as of last year, and just received my licensure here in Oklahoma to do this great work here for a lot of under-resourced people that we have here. So as far as some of that story of Oklahoma, we can go to the next slide. So the Osage, that's my tribe, one of my tribes, the tribe that I'm enrolled in, where I grew up. And, my personal trauma starts with the historical trauma of my people before I was born. I'm mixed race, but I grew up on a native reservation in Oklahoma, and I identify as being Wajaje Osage. My great-great-grandfather was a tribal council member. My grandfather was an Osage congressman. And from this slide, you can see we were on a large area of land throughout history, and we're forced onto a reservation. That small purple section there is where I grew up. On the way to this event of being forced into this area of land, many died. We were removed from our hunting grounds, promised with a treaty to be taken care of by the US government, which often did not happen. So there was often not food, and thus starvation and death and basic genocide. And my great grandmother, Grace Lessert Freeman, where I grew up on her land with her. She died when I was 21. I was with her till I was 21. She was one of the original allottees of that nation. If you know about allotment, that happened for us in 1906, and it's where we had, the government forced us to list our tribal members, and she was on that list. And I could go on a lot about the history of historical trauma, but in the interest of time, I'll just say, basically I grew up on this reservation, and historically there's a very limited ability to farm there. It's a very rocky bluff prairie, but it does grow a very protein-rich grass that the buffalo thrived on. And of course, those eventually, we had the genocide of the buffalo, slaughtered by the white settlers. But our tribe started thriving as best they could on that reservation with cattle ranches, and they became cattle ranchers themselves as the cattle eat the grass there. And so my Osage grandfather, Mark Freeman, became a rancher after his service in World War II. So I wear cowboy boots in his honor, as well as being Native. So the next slide. Tomboy to lesbian, right? Yeah. So I was born the namesake of my grandfather, Marca. So I grew up here, and here's a photo of me at age 4 in my boots with the horse trailer behind me. And this was one of the last years I think my mother could get a bow in my hair, because as far back as I can remember, I was what people called a tomboy. Due to the gender expression that I was exhibiting, so that I loved it. It allowed me, I didn't know any different, but I knew I liked that. Of all the things I got called, that was one thing that I really enjoyed, because I could ride motorcycles and play sports, and I literally wrestled cattle, life full of adventure on the 10 acres by the river where I grew up on the reservation. That, along with music, were my passion. I seemed to come in with some capacity for expressing music, and that was fostered in me in piano and study. I lived in an oil town, Ponca City, so there was a lot of people from around the world there, and we had the arts. I was very fortunate to have good education in the arts and where I grew up, so I had passion for music. However, in 1984, when I was 16, I witnessed 2 girls come out as lesbian in my high school. And this is when I came out to myself. I witnessed them because, I saw them together, and I knew that that was me, or something about me, like a light bulb going off. And then I watched what happened to them as the students and faculty and the adults of my town either attacked them, including physically, or ignored the fact that they were being attacked. So I was watching all that. It was 1984. We were in the height of the AIDS crisis, which at the time, it was known as the gay plague. Of course, the DSM, Diagnostic Journal, had only stopped diagnosing homosexuality as a diagnosable disorder in 1973. So we're still within the ramifications of that. I had no mentorship, no positive gay role models, no social media, no Gay Straight Alliance at the school, and neither did the adults in my life. They had, very little. So I went on to college, where I met other gay people and took part in the first Gay Pride March in Oklahoma City, which in 1989, which was a protest of about 500 people, gay people who were you know, in the height of this horrible situation we were in with the AIDS crisis. And it was 500 of us in the Ku Klux Klan, you know, in their stupid ass white sheets, you know, like on the sidelines. So gay pride, you know, in Tulsa, when I go now, it's like Google and AT&T, you know, it's like, okay, this is good. But also, you know, I like to remind people where it began. Yeah, so being a tomboy was okay, but, you know, at that time, being a butch lesbian was not. So there was pretty great turmoil in my family when I came out, as they had also been taught by conservative religion and colonization that injected homophobia into our native culture. You know, that two-spirit or gay, gender non-conforming people in our tribal culture have always existed. We'll talk more about that later, but that was, the colonization cleansed that. So I ended up dropping out of music school, and I began a lot of self-destruction. I believed I should not be alive. I was being traumatized by the systemic oppression, and I was medicating a lot, my trauma, with alcohol. And I ended up drinking in a lot of bars, and I met some firefighters one night, and I was strong. I was playing rugby, and they were like, "Why don't you be an EMT?" So I went to paramedic school. Firefighter school, EMT school, and then I said, okay, you know, I thought if I saved lives, I started realizing if I saved other people's lives, maybe my life would have value. So during this time, I also went to my first therapist. Some other gay people I was hanging out, queer people I was hanging out with in college, you know, college kids were expressing concern for me, which is a big deal in 1984 when your friends in college say you might want to go to therapy. You know, it's like, actually they said, we're worried you're gonna kill yourself. You know, so I went to a tiny town in Red Rock, Oklahoma in 1986, and I'm very lucky that the therapist, she asked why I was there for therapy, and I said because I'm a homosexual, and she said, "Who told you that's a problem?" And I said, "Well, you know, everyone." Except I think other gay people. And she said, "Well, I think those folks are the ones with the problem." And I'm very lucky that I met her first. And, you know, the things, you know, I didn't totally believe I didn't really think therapy was okay, but there's all the stigma about it. But I had like 2 sessions with her, and it kept me alive for that time. And I always love, if I could find her, oh my gosh, I would thank her so much, because she confronted systemic oppression in her statement. You know, I didn't have words for that then, but I do now. And it was enough to keep me alive, you know. And so I always like to let young clinicians know, hey, you can drop in just 1 or 2 sessions. And if you see somebody and you love them, and you know, you can name some things like that, you can trust that you're planting a seed and maybe helping someone stay alive. So yeah. So I went on to train as a paramedic. I was still struggling quite a lot, even though I was alive. And I was working in the emergency room in Oklahoma City. And it gave my family and my internal self really something to focus on other than being gay and genderqueer. And I stayed pretty closeted at work, but I must say that it is not a great way to be working in an emergency room. Overcompensation for being queer is often part of the queer trauma that I work with clients today, and because I have a deep understanding of what that is. At the time I was working in the ER, I was really self-destructing in my time off. The AIDS crisis was raging. People in my gay community were dying in large numbers. I felt ostracized, you know, from my community. I met a queer nurse at work, and we started kind of a suicide pact, doing drugs together, speed, cocaine, alcohol. And I know now I was medicating my pain, but I believe, you know, I was also suicidal. It was very high risk. I mean, we were speaking, you know, it was like, if I die, don't call our friends over at the emergency room where we work. Let's just die, you know. And sometimes I laugh during this story, because that's one form of letting off grief, and it's one of my favorites. So if I'm laughing, it's, you know, I'm okay. Just just join me. It's all right. Let's see. We're ready for the next slide. Transforming mystical experience. Here it is. Beyond oneness. Actually, this is a experience, a mystical experience that I love to talk about. Along the way, you know, I've had these powerful experiences that I believe have to do with my heritage, my worldview, my ancestors, my guides, oneness, mysticism. So I was high on speed and alcohol one night with this nurse that, you know, we were both queer people who had lost a lot in our communities. And I went out into an Oklahoma thunderstorm, and lightning hit the house and knocked me into the yard, and a voice said to me, "Stop killing yourself, you're here for a reason." It was reverberating through me. And after that, I did stop trying to kill myself, but a lot of trauma continued. I decided to go to nursing school, and I was a gay nursing student in the AIDS crisis in the closet. And one day at this University of Oklahoma, very reputable nursing school medical center, in a human sexuality workshop, a psychiatric nurse specialist announced to our class that gay people are gay because they have bad father figures. And this was 1991 in Oklahoma. I sat in my chair with the other students around me. I'm just feeling young me right now. And, you know, I felt like I was going to pass out. I couldn't move. I totally dissociated. It was really traumatic. Here I'm in this professional setting. Here I am trying to better myself. Here I am trying to just, you know, find something to keep me alive, to give to others. And that shit went down, you know, so a few years later, a nurse who I was working in an ICU, another experience came out as lesbian, and she broke up with her fiance, you know, and she was talking about it in a staff meeting, and the charge nurse at this ICU in Oklahoma City asked, "What did Marka do to you?" I wasn't in the staff meeting, but it got reported back to me. And what's so tragic to me is in both of those instances, I did nothing. I just held it, you know? So these were the experiences that were happening to me while I was having mystical experiences to stay alive. And, but no mentorship, no recourse. You know, I talked to gay lawyers who said, "Forget it, you won't win. It's 1991 in Oklahoma," you know, so. But at the same time, I was saving lives, you know, the very citizens who hated me, or, you know. In 1995, I was in downtown Oklahoma City when the Murrah building was bombed. And I was, you know, I was there, and I did my duty and went to that building still on fire and helped those people. It's a daycare center there. And, you know, the carnage, horrific. And within a year, I was drinking daily. I had PTSD. I didn't know it. I thought I was a trauma nurse, and I was all ready for that. But, you know, years later, when I trained in EMDR therapy in California, I met the people who started EMDRIA, which is this amazing nonprofit that goes around and trains people and goes to disasters and gives, you know, volunteers to give EMDR to survivors and rescuers. And they had actually begun EMDRIA. The organization began to treat the victims and first responders at the Oklahoma City bombing. And when I told them I wish I was in training with them years later in San Francisco, I was like, "I wish I'd known you were there, because I would have maybe come to get some help from you." And they were like, "How did you stay alive?" And I was like, "I drank." And they said, "Good, you know, whatever worked. And we're happy that you're here now." You know, this was after I'd done quite a lot of healing. But so yeah, I drank for the first year, but the second year I could no longer function. So I went into recovery, and pretty quickly I moved out of Oklahoma and moved to Boulder, Colorado, which is where I began a huge healing journey with many modalities, including psychedelics, entheogens, plant spirit medicine, I would like to say more accurately for me. Of course, Naropa University is there. I did grief rituals with Sobonfu Somé. I was so fortunate to be in her field. I took part in EMDR, personal EMDR therapy. I studied nonviolent communication. I learned self-empathy and empathy for others. And I started with the Santo Daime community. Ayahuasca people just inviting me, you know, I was playing music. I was starting to write music and live as an artist more, and was not working as a nurse for that time. And yeah, a lot of healing within that first non-ordinary state of consciousness, all those non-ordinary states of consciousness, kind of, but ayahuasca, that set and setting, so powerful, receiving a lot of healing. Let's see, I think we're ready for the next slide. Thank you. Yeah, so within all of that, I ended up in California playing a lot of music and traveling around. I was playing guitar. I was a pianist, but I couldn't carry a piano around, so I started writing music on guitar, and it was great. I had a lot of pretty good regional success playing music and in women's collectives and other songwriter collectives, and I was kind of the I won't go off script. I can hear Kate going, "Don't go off script about that yet." So a lot was happening for me around healing and mystical experiences, empathy experiences, self-empathy through EMDR, larger perspective, looking in, being able to tell that trauma narrative and get a bigger perspective, sitting with a tree and the tree energy helping me with the building being on fire, these types of things, really powerful. However, one of the most powerful experiences of my life was when I was invited to be more myself. This wonderful Ecuadorian shaman, grandfather, long lineage, who came to California to be with us. And we didn't speak the same language, but whenever he brought me forth to give me limpieza, a cleansing and a healing, he brought someone to translate over and said, I have seen your tribal people in you and where you're from and what has happened there to those people as well as to you. And there's I don't think he was taking personal responsibility but his lineage and his what he was about, as a healer. He said, I want you to go home to your people and be yourself. It's important for you to be yourself. It's good for you and it's good for your people. Identity, right? He didn't say, we are all one, you are healed, you may go. It was like, and I was like, what did you say? Like, wait, did he really say that? Because I kind of like it in California, where it's kind of safer and I don't have to face all that, all the stuff I faced. But I was visiting Oklahoma a lot. I kept going home, I would kind of pull it all together, visit, and then come back to California. But this was the first time that I visited home, and there's a long-standing tradition of peyote, Native American church, peyote church in the Osage Nation, starting from the late 1800s. It was a way of keeping some of our traditions, which had been genocided, alive through a syncretic, similar to Santo Daime syncretic religion of Christianity with peyote and Native singing and these types of things. So I sat in peyote church for the first time and received, around identity healing. I was also working as a therapist at Native American Health Center in San Francisco, and there was a lot of Osages there for various reasons. And in California, there was displacement of Osages to California in a couple of times in history. So I started going to the California Osage meetings and meeting people from Oklahoma, from the tribe there, and they all knew my grandfather, who was an Osage congressman in time. And I was playing a lot of music, so I was writing music while also training as a therapist at Native American Health Center. And I wrote an album, and the Osage Nation gave me a grant. I wrote this album kind of about heritage and survival and all the things, that I had lived through. And I ended up singing in Oklahoma at the inauguration of our chief in Congress, wearing a man's ribbon shirt, my super short hair. Some of the more liberal Congress people had invited me in to do that. Some of the more conservative people were not very happy about it. That was part of my healing, to go back to my people and be myself and to stand in that. And each time that I did that and I started dancing in our own Inlanchka ceremony and stuff, my life just got better and better and better. I began to love myself, my identity. I began to be a better therapist, better clinician. It's just opened a lot of doors for me, which has got me right here with you all today. Let's go to the next one. embracing two-spirit identity. So two-spirit identity, indigenous identity, upon first contact, over 120 tribes in North America were documented as having gender non-conforming people. So the Europeans came over and they wrote depictions of what they were seeing, and there's large numbers of, people born in certain bodies who are in opposite gender roles, same-sex relationships. And of course, they wrote about that in a derogatory manner, but these folks were accepted by their Native communities. In 1990, there was an umbrella term, two-spirit, adopted to designate Native American LGBTQI people. Some people don't relate with that name. Some people use their own traditional words. In Osage, we have the word mehuge, which I discovered over the last couple of years. It's a word that's, not talked about a lot, but we're bringing it back into the light. So yeah, generally two-spirit is accepted as an alternative to derogatory European terminology and a way of stepping outside that European construct of gender and sexuality as we decolonize. That's a big word right now. I love it. Decolonizing and land back, consciousness around kinship, including gender and sexuality. How exciting is that? So being myself, as I was instructed to do, I talk a lot about this. And so, yeah, I think we're ready for the next slide, which is, there's my lightning bolt, right? That knocked me down and said, hey, 21-year-old, you're here for a reason. And now at 56, I'm happy to be here with you. I have such a charmed, amazing, awesome life. I still struggle with PTSD, I won't lie. I'm shaking a little bit as I'm telling you this story. But this is why I'm very motivated. I'm resourced to give back to others and tell my story, and I hope it helps for some folks. And in fact, with the art, we're almost done here with my part. But in 2020, I saw a statistic that 33% of Native American LGBT youth attempted suicide. So 33% of Native LGBTQ youth attempted suicide in 2020. Whoa. And then I saw a grant from Indian Collective called the Radical Imagination Grant, and I applied. And I proposed, I want to write a 10-song album, piano, electronic bass, and make a music video about the experience of being indigiqueer, two-spirit in a transphobic and colonized society. And a lot of what I've talked about today, you'll see in this art piece. I'm going to share, this is not released to the world yet, August 18th, I'm going to be releasing it, but you get a special sneak peek today to kind of show you, the story, my own story, and how my own creativity, my own identity is in making art. And also, this is a community project. We have amazing people. Claudia Quintes, who's a MAPS trained clinician, who's Peruvian, and Quechua, came in and played a major role in the ceremonial set design, depicting a community healing. We had the native community of Portland showed up and helped us with this, along with a lot of great allies. And my mother, you'll see this beautiful fan is in the video, which my mother gave to me when I was 40. It's like one of the starring roles. And this is usually the part where Kate over there is saying, just show the video, stop talking about it. So if you want to see it, hang out. We're going to show you the video, and then Kate will share some of her brilliance. So Zach has got the technical challenge. Thank you, Zach, for bringing this up. Observation highway in the midnight hour. Flicker of the headlights, I'm losing my power. Storm clouds move across a full moonlight. Hate speech echoing eclipse my life. Watch out for the deer as you go home. It's fight, flight, fight, flight, freeze or fall. How much longer can I go on? My grandmother's road is all I've ever known. How long? How long? How long? How long? Ooh, how long? Ooh, how long? Ooh, how long? A thousand stars behind the neon lights, 1,000 heartbreaks beat, beat as I drive into the city at night, city at night, city at night. I miss my mother, I miss my home. Red earth heals in the thunderstorm. Heartbeat drum, heartbeat drum, heartbeat drum, heartbeat drum. In the club where the fire water flows, love is a battlefield over the rainbow, rainbow. Searing fall, laser lights on this dirty dance floor. I'm gonna dance, dance, save my life. One more night, save my life. One more night. How long? Ooh, 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 how long? Anybody see this? Numbed by the genocide, blinded by the colonized, the thunder and the lightning, the thunder and the lightning, lightning, lightning is gonna light up, light up, light up. So rise up, child, you're here for a reason. For a reason. Rise up, child, you're here for a reason. For a reason. Yeah. I don't know, can people hear me? I don't know if you can hear me or not. Okay. Yeah, great. I'll just start. Well, because there's the credits, but I will say Silas Hoffer was our protagonist there, who's Grand Ron in Yakima and is part of Name Recognition Youth Alliance of Portland. Holding that fan up, I just every time, So thank you for it's great to, after all the work of a couple of years, to be putting this out. And if you're interested, there's a 10-song album that goes with this, and lots more songs around Two Spirits called 2S Sacred is the name of the album, and I'll be releasing it starting in August. Yeah. And I'll turn it over to Kate.
Thank you, Marx. To invite everybody, maybe just take a deep breath. It's pretty, well, it's very evocative for me. I've seen the video countless numbers of time at this point, and it's still really powerful emotionally. So thank you, Marx, for sharing. We're gonna stay on the same topic, but switch gears. As Marx was saying earlier, you know, they're in addition to being an amazing clinician and therapist, they're a storyteller and an artist. And my background's in academia. I'm a critical theorist at heart, so I'm gonna kind of be switching into that mode. And Zach, if you want to bring up back to the following slide after that one, that's perfect. Thank you so much. So, you know, one of the things that I think really stands out, at least for me, when I'm hearing Marx's story, is the way, and this is the main point that I think they were making, right, is the ways in which mystical and psychedelic experience have helped them embrace their identity as a queer person, as a non-binary person, as an indigiqueer person, and the way in which all of those are inseparable. And that's been healing not only for themselves, but for the community. And I think the video we just saw is such a great example of that, both them bringing their own artistry forth through their own healing and how that's impacted the people they worked with on that project. And then the story itself, where we see the community healing and the healing of the main character played by Silas. And it's also healing the ancestors and the contemporary two spirits we see in the motion portrait, right? All of that interconnection. And so I'm underscoring that because here what we're talking about identity, and I mean identity here, not just in that idiosyncratic sense of what makes all of us unique, right? Like our personalities, our little differences, but I really mean identity in terms of the way in which we're positioned in intersecting systems of oppression and privilege, whether that's gender identity, sexuality, race, etc. So that's so important. And Marx is, you know, thank you for sharing the way in which that's played out for you. But identities often had a really harmful place in the history of psychedelics. And so as people practicing in this field, I think it's really important that we be able to contend with that. And I want to focus on two different ways in which identity has been approached in a harmful way in psychedelic assisted therapy and discourse. So Zach, if we can go to the next one. The first is what Marx has already been alluding to, but is the importance of rethinking this "we're all one" narrative. I'm assuming this is probably familiar to many of you, whether you're, you know, practitioners in the field or interested community member, or however you come to find yourselves in the space that we're sharing today, right? But in that "we're all one" narrative, the kind of the dominant thinking there is that identity is something that's supposed to be downplayed, something that we're supposed to surrender in the name of ego dissolution. And that ego dissolution, that suspension of the subject-object duality, merging into oneness, that's kind of the goal. And this belief that that's the ultimate psychedelic experience, and that's, you know, somehow like the truth that psychedelics have to teach us, that's something we've really seen be dominant in psychedelic research studies, as well as kind of the broader community. And I want to go back to the MEQ, the Mystical Experience Questionnaire that Marx was mentioning earlier, because that is where we see it kind of spelled out in a really clear way, that the importance of that oneness narrative. So the MEQ is a series of questions that's trying to help assess the effectiveness of psychedelics in relieving depression, anxiety, end-of-life dread, other symptoms that are being studied. And the working hypothesis of that questionnaire, which has been used in a pretty widespread way, is that if people have an experience of oneness as defined by the MEQ, then they're going to have a reduction in symptoms. So the MEQ, it measures other things like positive mood, ineffability, transcendence of time and space, etc. But under the mysticism category, we've got 6 out of the 15 measures are related, so almost half, right, are related to oneness, and the others are focused on the sacred and the noetic. And the oneness related measures include, I'm quoting here from the questionnaire, experience of the fusion of your personal self into a larger whole, experience of oneness or unity with objects and or persons perceived in your surroundings, and experience of the insight that all is one. So when we look at that language, we've got oneness here being also described as an experience of sameness, right, of merging into this greater singular whole. So we've kind of have a slide from we're all one is standing in for we're all the same. So the issue here is, again, we're not anti-oneness, right? And but the issue is that the MEQ's measure is defining the mystical experience almost exclusively in those terms. So there's not really room for other experiences of mysticism, such as the one that Marx was experiences and were so healing, right? And what's potentially harmful in that is that it's implying that people who are going through this protocol in psychedelic assisted therapy, that if they've missed this particular definition of mysticism, then they've missed the healing potential of psychedelics. And so we see that, being played out in the research side. We also see this kind of aversion to oneness play out. The aversion to focus on identity and the emphasis on, we're all one as being the ultimate that we're trying to achieve through psychedelics in regular discourse. We had some of our colleagues at Chacruna published this study looking at reactions to posts published by MAPS, and that when they talk about identity and race and equity in particular, the slew of negative comments, I can't remember the exact number, but there's a huge increase in negative comments. Usually when they post, if it's not about that, a lot of positive feedback, but then they start to post about that. And people are like, why do we have to talk about this? The whole point is that we're all one. This is, problematic. We're just kind of staying in lower consciousness by addressing these kinds of topics. So lots of ways in which this shows up. I think this is particularly harmful to everybody to have this overemphasis on the we're all one narrative, but particularly to marginalized community and especially to the 2SLGBTQ+ community. I think we see any discourse that is privileging a singular narrative runs the risk of being oppressive because it's delegitimizing other narrative, right? It's not making space for other kinds of experience. So we're already kind of in some dangerous territory with that. But then when we think about the 2SLGBTQ+ community, part of the trauma often is that our sexual identities, our gender identities aren't taken seriously. They're not believed. They're dismissed as unreal, they're erased, right? So the last thing we need as a community is then to have our experiences of psychedelics also ignored, seen as lesser than, seen as somehow not legitimate, or just silenced or not being part of the narrative and the record because they don't fit what that dominant narrative is supposed to be. And so this is concerning because we've seen, as Marx's experience has shown, but also we're having more and more accounts of queer and trans people's psychedelic experiences. And these seem to suggest that revelation that we're all one is maybe not the dominant or maybe not the most salient psychedelic experience that the queer and trans community, again, not to say that queer and trans people don't have experiences of we're all one, they do, and they're powerful and they're healing, but there's a large segment from the reports we're hearing of people who are having other kinds of powerful experience with psychedelics. And so we just want to make sure that there's space for that, right? And that can be accounted for. And oftentimes healing from homophobia and transphobia involves this accepting of difference, the finding of celebration and empowerment in it. So a focus on identity. So focus, encouraging or kind of pigeonholing people into the experience of oneness and sameness. It may not only be less available to the queer and trans community, but being encouraged to pursue that may also be harmful because it's not making space to actually may be really important to pursue your connection with your identity. So if we can move to the next slide, Zach, just to kind of summarize everything I've just shared in that. I think equity in psychedelics, what it comes down to is taking seriously the multiplicity of experiences that patients and people who use psychedelics have, and not imposing the interpretive frameworks on those people, but letting them rather create their own interpretive frameworks, share their experiences and interpret them themselves in the way that is making sense to them. And if we don't do that, I think that we risk re-traumatizing instead of being therapeutic in our approach to psychedelics. And then when people do have, I would just sort of add to that, when people do report having experiences of oneness, I would also say that, as people in the field, whether you're a clinician or just a community member, to be curious about what that means, because oneness doesn't have to be sameness. I sort of showed the ways in which it's being framed that way, but oneness, it can mean interconnection, it can be interrelatedness, it can mean a lot of different things, right? That's not necessarily sameness. So it's not necessarily antithetical to identity. I think that there's experiences of oneness and identity that can actually go hand in hand, but maybe we haven't had the language or the frameworks for that. So being open to that as well. And then moving on, Zach, to the next slide. The other piece of psychedelic history, I think that's had a harmful approach to identity, is conversion therapy. Or the ways in which psychedelic has been used to that. So if on the one hand, if we're looking at the oneness narrative, there's sort of like under attention to identity, right? Lack of looking into that. And on the other hand, there's a history of psychedelics and zeroing in on identity in this really harmful way. So in the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, psychedelics were used in conversion therapy, including by some of the most famous practitioners of that era, including Timothy Leary and Stan Grof. And that quote, by Tim Leary on there, I think really sort of is, kind of like amazing to read that. And I know that the field has really distanced him itself a lot from Tim Leary for all kinds of good reasons, but Stan Grof less so. And this is not about, canceling Stan Grof and the amazing contributions he's made to the field. They continue to be important and relevant. But I think it's important, though, that we be able to grapple with that and reckon that there is this history and we have to excavate it, learn from it, make repairs. And I'm happy to see more and more researchers doing that, right? So hopefully, I would love to see Stan Grof engage in a conversation about, his participation in that, in using psychedelics for conversion and what he thinks about it now. Because if we take a restorative justice approach, right, that entails accountability, community dialogue, learning, reparative action that then's decided upon collaboratively by those who've perpetrated the harm and those who were harmed. So wouldn't that be amazing if we could have that conversation, right, at some point? And part of the reason I'm bringing that up is that the queer and trans communities have really good reason to be wary of the medical establishment, right? And especially if we think about conversion therapy still being legal in many parts of the country, that's not like something that's behind us. It's very much alive. And if you're paying attention at all to what's happening politically, we've seen an onslaught of anti-LGBTQ and specifically anti-trans legislation this year. The HRC just declared a national state of emergency for the community. So this continues to be very relevant, right, to this day. And I think that as we, whether you're part of the community or not part of the community engaging in this work, I think we have to earn the trust of queer and trans people that we work with, whether we, again, work with them in a professional setting or we're working with them in a community setting. We can't assume that there's that trust, right? It's something that has to be earned and for good reason, and we have to be able to reckon with that. And I think there's a need to reassure the community that that engaging in psychedelics, that we're doing that in settings that are not attempting to change the community or and that there's actually space to ensure that the protocols and the setting are there to affirm the expression, the discovery, the embracing of those non-normative gender identities, expressions, and sexual desires. So something to think about, right? Our protocols, again, our set and our setting, what assumptions are we bringing into this work? How can we be more supportive and recognize the importance of identity in what we're doing? I had some, maybe I'll just say, maybe just the next slide. I know we're running short on time. I want to make sure we have plenty of time for conversation and dialogue. So I want to just make sure I get to this last slide because it's so important, and I see this misunderstood all the time. So one of the things that comes up when we're thinking about identity in a lot of different settings is that gender and sexuality and race are socially constructed. And that's a really important way of thinking about these and understanding what these terms mean. And what it means to say they're socially constructed is to say that they're not biologically based, or they don't have an ontological reality. So we are all the same at the core, right? Like there is this oneness about us, but yet these things come into being through things like medical institutions, legal systems, social and cultural norms, language, right? So if we think of heterosexuality, for example, that hasn't always existed. It's so naturalized, it's hard for us to imagine a world without heterosexuality. And what does that mean? Or homosexuality for that matter. And it means that people were, of course, engaging in sex that we might consider heterosexual sex or homosexual sex in our contemporary frameworks, but that until the 19th century, until in the Western world, the 19th century, before that, those acts weren't assumed to mean anything about a person or their identity or how they related to the world. They were just sort of facts of life that didn't actually carry that identitarian weight, right? So that the fact that it means the kinds of things it means to this day is socially constructed. But here's where where nuance is so important. That just because something is socially constructed doesn't mean that it doesn't have really tangible and material effects, or that we can just say, oh, it's socially constructed and now I don't have to engage with it, right? And I see a lot of that on the social media, people who are kind of, resistant to talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. They'll use this idea that's socially constructed as a way to bypass, be like, it's socially constructed, so why are we talking about this? It's all made up. It's like, well, yeah, it's made up, but it has a very real effect on people's lives, right? As Marx was just sharing, and as I imagine many of us on the call can relate to. So it can't just be willed away, right? It has to be named and it has to be addressed in order to dismantle it. And that's why I think it's really important that we build practices and build communities that are attuned to these, so we can better serve queer, trans, and BIPOC communities and make sure that the work we do with psychedelics is helpful to those communities and not harmful. I think let's pause there on the presentation, and just so we can make sure we've got time for dialogue.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Marx. So I wanted to just give some brief time to process. There's a lot of amazing things that were said. I know I personally had a lot of thoughts. I wanted to give people an opportunity to think of questions for the Q&A that you have for either Marx or Kate. Maya and I have a question each to ask if there's no one that wants to jump at the opportunity, but this is here for you. Your questions are very much valued. So if you would like to put them in the comments section, we will read them for you. And questions that can pertain to the music video, to the content of Kate's presentation, or Mark's story.